The world under the bridge was a symphony of dampness. The drip of collected rain from the girders above was the percussion, the rush of the river, the constant bass line, and the distant hum of traffic the strings. Amara knew every note. She knew the way the air grew heavy before a storm, and the particular smell of wet concrete that followed. This small, forgotten space, a shack cobbled together from plywood and corrugated metal, was hers. It was a world of gray and brown, and of survival measured in dry socks and a full stomach. Tonight, a new sound cut through the familiar score. A sharp, wet cough, followed by the scuff of expensive leather shoes on gravel. It was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. Leather shoes like that didn't belong in the mud and shadows of her world. Amara froze, every muscle in her body going taut. Her hand closed around the rusted pipe she kept by her cot. It wasn't much, but it was heavy. Another sound. A low groan. A body slumping against the thin wall of her shack. The entire structure shuddered. She held her breath, listening. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was a heavy, waiting silence. She counted to 100, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Nothing. Slowly, she crept to the makeshift door, a sheet of tin held in place by a wire loop. She peered through a rust hole, her eye taking in the slice of darkness outside. A man was on the ground, a long shadow in the deeper shadows of the bridge's underbelly. He was trying to push himself up, one arm trembling with the effort. The other was clamped tight against his side, and even in the gloom, she could see the dark stains spreading through the pristine white of his shirt. She should have stayed inside. She should have pulled the tin door tighter and pretended she heard nothing. That was the smart thing to do. That was the survivor's choice. But she had been a nursing student once, a lifetime ago, before tuition and family tragedy had sent her life spiraling into this forgotten place. Some instincts, she was learning, did not die easily. She slipped outside, the cold, damp air clinging to her worn gray sweater. The man grunted as she approached, his head snapping up. In the sliver of moonlight that cut under the bridge, she saw his eyes. They were dark, sharp, and utterly furious, not with her, but with himself, with the weakness of his own body. He was German, his features sharp and aristocratic, like something carved from unforgiving stone. A thin white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a flaw in the Teutonic perfection. His suit, what she could see of it, was black and tailored, so precisely it seemed a part of him. It was ruined now, stained with mud and blood. "Geh," he rasped, the single word a command, not a plea. His voice was a low rumble, strained with pain. Amara ignored him. She knelt, her dark blue jeans soaking up the damp from the ground. "You're bleeding a lot." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise in their depths. He probably expected her to run, or to rob him. Most people would have, I am aware. "You'll bleed out right here if you don't put pressure on it." She reached out, her movements slow and deliberate. "Let me see." He flinched as her fingers brushed his, but he was too weak to stop her. She pulled his hand away from his side. It was a gunshot wound. Clean entry, maybe, but it was deep and it was messy. He needed a doctor. He needed a hospital. What he had was her, in a shack under a bridge. "This is bad," she said, her voice calm. It was the voice she'd been taught to use when things were falling apart. The calm in the center of the storm. "Your assessment is noted," he said, his words laced with a biting sarcasm that was impressive given his condition. She ripped a long strip from the hem of her own oversized t-shirt beneath the sweater. It wasn't sterile, but it was better than nothing. She balled it up and pressed it hard against the wound. He hissed, his body arching in a spasm of pain, but he didn't fight her. His eyes were locked on her face, analytical and unnervingly focused. He was watching her, evaluating her, even as his life was draining into the dirt. That was when the headlights sliced through the darkness. Two black sedans, silent as sharks, rolled to a stop at the edge of the riverbank. Men in dark suits spilled out, moving with an eerie, synchronized purpose. They fanned out, guns drawn. The man beside her tried to push himself up again, a low growl in his throat. "Conrad," one of the men called out, his voice sharp with panic. "Boss." The man, Conrad, let his head fall back with a sigh of frustrated resignation. The fight seemed to go out of him, replaced by a cold, dangerous stillness. His dark eyes found Amara's again. The fury was gone, replaced by something far more chilling: calculation. In that moment, she understood. The tailored suit, the professional soldiers, the gunshot wound. This was not a random mugging. This was something else entirely. She had stumbled into a world that did not have people like her in it, a world of violence and power she couldn't begin to comprehend. One of the men, older than the others, rushed to his side. "Boss, are you all right? We will handle the traitors." He saw Amara and his hand immediately went to the gun at his hip. "Who is this?" Conrad didn't look away from her. His gaze was heavy, pinning her in place. He was breathing in shallow pants, the blood loss taking its toll. She helped. The man, his lieutenant, relaxed his stance fractionally but did not look convinced. He barked orders in German, and two of his men lifted Conrad with a practiced efficiency that spoke of doing this many times before. They were moving him toward the car. Amara stayed kneeling on the ground, the blood cooling on her hands. She thought that was it. They would take him and go, and she would be a ghost. A strange memory. She could go back to her shack, wash her hands, and forget the feeling of that impossibly fine suit under her fingers. But as they placed him in the back of the sedan, Conrad spoke her fate into existence. His voice weak, but absolute. "Bring her." The Lieutenant Gregor turned to her. His face was a mask of polite regret, but his eyes were hard. "You heard the boss. You're coming with us." It was not a request. She was pulled to her feet, her rusted pipe still lying uselessly by her cot. They didn't handle her roughly, but there was an unmistakable certainty to their grip. They put her in the other car, the door closing with a solid, final thud that sealed her out of her own life. As the car pulled away, she looked back at the bridge, at the shadow that was her home. That was the moment everything changed. She hadn't chosen this. She hadn't asked for it. But a German crime boss had bled on her floor, and now, it seemed, she belonged to him. The car was silent, the city lights of Berlin flashing past the tinted windows, each one pulling her further and further away from the only world she knew. The penthouse was an exercise in silent, minimalist luxury. It was a place of cool marble, vast panes of glass, and air that tasted of nothing. It was the complete opposite of her shack. So clean and sterile it felt like a hospital for the soul. Amara stood in the center of the enormous living room, feeling small and out of place in her damp jeans and worn sweater. The city sprawled out below, a glittering, indifferent beast. She had been brought here, to the heart of Conrad's empire, and left to wait. A private doctor, a nervous man with sweat beading on his upper lip, had been summoned. He'd worked on Conrad in a room down the hall, and the low, pained grunts had eventually faded into silence. Now Gregor, the lieutenant, stood guard by the door, his posture rigid, his eyes missing nothing. Amara wrapped her arms around herself. She told herself it was survival instinct, the need to understand her new cage. But a deeper, more honest part of her knew she was watching the door to that bedroom, waiting. Hours later, the doctor emerged, looking pale. He murmured something to Gregor in German, packed his bag, and was escorted out without a single glance in her direction, as if she weren't even there. Gregor finally acknowledged her. "He is resting." The bullet passed through. He was lucky. "Lucky?" Amara repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "He has questions for you. When he wakes up, you will answer them." "And then what?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Then do I get to go?" Gregor's expression was unreadable. "The boss will decide what happens to you." That was not the answer she wanted. She was a witness, a loose end. In the stories, loose ends were tied up permanently. Her mind raced, cataloging exits, weaknesses in the security she could see. There were none. This place was a fortress. She was given a room larger than her entire shack, with a bed that looked like a cloud, and a bathroom clad in black slate. There were clothes laid out on the bed, simple black sweats, and a t-shirt. They were soft, expensive, and felt alien against her skin, a silent offering, or a uniform for the new prisoner. She couldn't sleep. Instead, she found herself drawn back into the main living area. The penthouse was silent. The guards at the elevator were stone statues. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. She could have let him die. She replayed the moment in her head, the choice she'd made. The regret was a bitter pill. Confidence, her instructors had told her, was about making the right choice under pressure. She was beginning to think she'd failed the test. A low moan drifted from down the hall. It was faint, but in the oppressive silence, it was as loud as a scream. It came again, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. She didn't think. She just moved. Gregor was not at his post, likely conferring with his men. She pushed open the heavy bedroom door. The room was dark, lit only by the city glow filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Conrad was thrashing in the enormous bed, his body slick with sweat. He was caught in a fever dream, his hands clenching the silk sheets. "Annalise," he rasped, the name a raw wound. "Annalise, I'm sorry." Amara hesitated at the door. This was private. This was the chink in the armor, the crack in the stone. This was the man beneath the crime boss. She should leave, but the nurse in her, the ghost of the woman she used to be, took over. She walked to the bed, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. She touched his forehead. He was burning up. The doctor had given him antibiotics, but the fever was winning. She went to the bathroom, found a washcloth, and soaked it in cool water. She returned to his side and gently wiped his face, his neck. He stilled under her touch, his breathing evening out slightly. He was mumbling in German now, his words fragmented, desperate. "Annalise," he said again, his eyes flickering open. They were unfocused, glazed with fever. But they found her. For a second, she thought he was looking through her, seeing someone else. Then his brow furrowed. "Who? You have a fever," she said softly. "You need to rest." His hand shot out, his grip surprisingly strong, and closed around her wrist. It wasn't violent, but it was an anchor. He was holding on to her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that was spinning apart. "Stay," he breathed. The word a plea, not an order, and she did. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the raw pain in his voice when he said that other woman's name. Maybe it was the way his carefully constructed mask of control had shattered, revealing the vulnerable man beneath. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because for the first time since she'd been brought here, she had made a choice. She wasn't a prisoner being told what to do. He was asking. She sat in the chair by his bed as the night bled into dawn. She kept the cool cloth on his forehead. She listened to him murmur a name that wasn't hers, and she watched the most powerful, dangerous man she had ever met be reduced to this. She learned a secret without him ever speaking it. He carried a wound that had nothing to do with the bullet hole in his side. It was a woman he had failed to protect. And as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the room, she had the terrible feeling that he was looking at her and trying to figure out how not to fail again. The fever broke with the dawn. Conrad woke to the sight of her asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head tilted at an awkward angle, her face relaxed in a way he hadn't seen it before. The cool cloth was still on his nightstand in a bowl of water. He remembered flashes, a soft voice, a cool hand on his forehead, the name he never spoke aloud, clawing its way out of his throat. He watched her for a long time. She was calm. Everyone in his world was either terrified of him or trying to use him. They vibrated with a nervous energy he found exhausting, but she possessed a stillness that mirrored his own. She had knelt in the mud and pressed her hands to his wound without flinching. She had sat by his bed all night without being ordered to. She was different. When Amara finally stirred, her eyes fluttered open and met his. He was sitting up, his bandaged torso bare. The mask was back in place. His eyes were clear, sharp, and assessing. The vulnerability of the night was gone, locked away so completely it might never have existed. "You should have let the doctor handle it," he said, his voice cold, devoid of gratitude. "Your fever was dangerously high," she replied, her own voice flat. She would not let him intimidate her. "The doctor was gone. You know medicine. It wasn't a question. I used to." She stood up, stretching the stiffness from her limbs. "I'm not your nurse." "No," he agreed, his eyes raking over her, from her bare feet to the soft black clothes that were his. "You are not." The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the unspoken things, the name he'd called out, the way he'd held her wrist. "My cousin, Emile, arranged the attack." He wants my territory, my empire. He was telling her this, she realized, as a test. To see how she would react, she just nodded. I see. He is not the type to leave loose ends. Conrad continued, his gaze intense. You were seen. You are now a liability. So what you're saying is you can't let me go because he might find me. I cannot let you go because he will use you, he corrected, the words precise and cold. He will assume you are important to me. He will see you as leverage. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Leverage? I'm a woman who lives in a shack. What importance could I possibly have to you? That is when she made the mistake of looking up. He moved like the room owed him space. Swinging his legs over the side of the bed and standing in one fluid motion, ignoring the pull of his stitches, he closed the distance between them until he was standing directly in front of her. He was tall, and he used every inch of it to loom over her. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. She smelled the faint, clean scent of antiseptic and something else, something uniquely him, a hint of smoke and expensive cologne. You misunderstand, he said, his voice a low, dangerous murmur. Emil's perception is now reality, because you were there, because my men saw you with me, because you are now in my home. You are mine to protect. The words hung in the air, a claim disguised as a duty. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever heard. The attack came 2 days later. Amara was beginning to fall into a strange, suspended rhythm in the penthouse. She ate meals she didn't order, wore clothes she didn't choose, and watched the city live a life she was no longer a part of. The only anchor in her day was Conrad. He was a quiet, intense presence. He would watch her read a book he had delivered, or watch her as she stood by the window. He rarely spoke, but his eyes were always on her. The tension was a constant hum in the air between them. She was in the kitchen making a cup of tea when the world exploded. The windows of the living room shattered inwards, a deafening roar followed by a shower of glass. Amara dropped the mug, spinning around as alarms blared. Men in black tactical gear were rappelling down the side of the building, smashing through the other windows. Conrad's men moved instantly, a whirlwind of disciplined violence. Gunfire erupted, the contained pops of silenced weapons mixing with the shouts of men. But the attackers were prepared. They were inside. Amara was frozen for a heartbeat, her mind struggling to catch up. Then Conrad was there. He appeared from his office, a gun already in his hand, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed her arm, pulling her behind him as he fired 2 precise shots, dropping an attacker who had rounded the corner. Stay behind me, he ordered, his voice calm amidst the chaos. He was moving, using the large marble island in the kitchen as cover, pulling her with him. His body was a solid wall in front of hers, shielding her from the violence. She could feel the heat of him, smell the gunpowder and his cologne. It was terrifying and, in a way she hated to admit, it was reassuring. An attacker burst into the kitchen from the other side. Conrad was engaged with another target. The man saw her. He saw the way Conrad was protecting her. He grinned, a predator's smile, and raised his weapon. There was no time to think. Amara's hand shot out, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove. She swung it with all her might, connecting with the side of the man's head. He staggered, his eyes wide with shock. The distraction was all Conrad needed. He spun, his movements economical and lethal, and put a bullet through the man's chest. The man crumpled to the floor, his eyes still fixed on her. Amara stared at the body, at the skillet in her hand, her knuckles white. She had just helped kill a man. A line had been crossed. The woman who lived under the bridge, the nursing student who believed in saving lives, was gone. In her place was someone who could survive in this world. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Conrad looked from the dead man to her, his eyes unreadable. He saw the skillet, the shock on her face giving way to a hard resolve. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of dark approval. The firefight was over in minutes. Conrad's men were ruthlessly efficient. They secured the penthouse, dragging bodies away with a grim professionalism. Gregor approached, a cut on his cheek. Emile sent un message. A failed one, Conrad said, his eyes still on Amara. He took the skillet from her unresisting hand and set it on the counter. His fingers brushed hers, and a jolt went through her. He dismissed Gregor with a curt nod. They were alone again, surrounded by the wreckage of the attack. The air was thick with the smell of cordite. She was trembling, the adrenaline starting to fade, leaving a hollow sickness in its wake. He stepped closer, backing her against the counter until his body was nearly flush with hers. He placed a hand on the marble on either side of her, caging her in. "I should have sent you away," he said, his voice low and raw. "The moment I was stable. I should have given you money and made you disappear. Why didn't you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. His eyes burned into hers. They were dark, intense, and filled with a possessiveness that was as terrifying as it was absolute. "Because the thought of my cousin finding you, of anyone else touching you, is unacceptable." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a confession of something far more dangerous. It was a claim staked in blood and violence. "When I was in the dark," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, so quiet she could feel the vibration of it in her chest, bleeding under that bridge. "I thought of Annalise. I thought of how I failed her, how my world consumed her." He leaned in closer, his breath warm against her cheek. "But when I woke up here, with you, I was not thinking of her. I was thinking I would not make the same mistake twice." He was admitting she was his weakness. He was telling her she was the vulnerability he was willing to burn his entire empire to the ground to protect. Emil hadn't just sent a message. He had made Amara the center of the war. The call came 3 days after the attack. Emil did not bother with threats or pleasantries. He sent a picture to Conrad's phone. It was a photograph of the bridge, of the pathetic, cobbled-together shack Amara had called home. In the next photo, it was a pile of smoldering ash. The message was simple and clear. "I know where you came from. I can erase every part of your past." Amara stared at the photo, a strange emptiness echoing in her chest. She had expected to feel loss, a pang of grief for the only place that had been hers. Instead, she felt a cold, hardening anger. Emil thought he was taking something from her. He didn't understand that shack was just a place. Her life, her real life, had ended long before she'd moved there. What he had done was not an erasure. It was a declaration of war. "He's not just targeting you anymore," she said, looking up at Conrad. "He's targeting me. He thinks you are my weakness," Conrad replied, his jaw tight. He is about to learn how wrong he is. The final confrontation was not a battle of armies in the street. It was a surgical strike, planned with the cold precision of a master tactician. Emil had agreed to a meeting, a supposed truce negotiation at a neutral location, an abandoned dockside warehouse. It was, of course, a trap. Conrad knew it was a trap. Emil knew that Conrad knew. It was a game of chess where both kings were stepping onto the board. "You will stay here," Conrad had commanded, gesturing to the panic room hidden behind a bookshelf in his office. "You will not open it for anyone but me or Gregor." Amara had looked him in the eye. "No." He blinked, taken aback. No one said no to him. "This is not a negotiation, Amara." He said her name differently than anyone else did. It was not just a sound. It was a thing he owned. "He is doing this because of me," she stated, her voice unwavering. "He's expecting you to hide me away like a treasure, like something fragile. He's underestimating me, and that means he's underestimating you. That's the only advantage we have." He studied her, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw no fear. He saw the same steel she had when she swung that skillet. He saw the woman who had sat by his bed while he was helpless. "What are you proposing?" he asked, the question itself a massive concession. "I come with you," she said. "Not to the meeting. I stay in the car, but I'm there. He'll have eyes everywhere. When his spotters see me, they'll report back that your weakness is right there, out in the open. It will make him arrogant. It will make him careless." It was a risky, insane plan, and it was brilliant. It preyed on Emil's exact prejudice. He saw Amara not as a person but as a symbol, a prize. He would never conceive of her being part of the strategy. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, a skeleton of rust and corrugated steel. Rain began to fall, slicking the asphalt. Amara sat in the back of the armored sedan, her heart a steady, heavy beat. Gregor was in the driver's seat, his eyes scanning the area. Conrad had already gone inside with a small team. The trap was set. Now they waited for the jaws to spring. It happened faster than she expected. A van screeched to a halt, blocking their car. Men poured out, guns raised. But they weren't focused on the car. They were a distraction. The real attack was for Conrad. Inside. Then, a new variable. A second team of Emil's men emerged from the shadow, and their target was not the warehouse. It was her. They swarmed the car. Gregor swore, drawing his weapon. "Stay down." But Amara was watching their movements. They were trying to pry the doors open. They were expecting a prize in a box. She remembered the layout of the area from the schematics Conrad had shown her. She remembered one detail. A small, unsecured maintenance hatch on the pier just 20 feet from their position. It led directly to the river below. Gunfire shattered the rear window. Gregor was returning fire, but they were outnumbered. Amara made a decision. She was not a treasure. She was not a victim. She was a weapon. "Give me your backup piece," she said to Gregor, her voice sharp. He glanced at her, his eyes wide. "What?" "Your ankle holster. Give it to me. And cover me." He didn't argue. He saw the look on her face. He passed the small pistol back to her. It was heavy, cold. She had never held a gun before, but her hand was steady. "When I say go, get to the boss," she ordered. "Don't worry about me." Before he could protest, she kicked her door open, using it as a shield. She didn't fire. She just ran, straight for the pier. As she predicted, half of the attackers broke off, their greed overriding their discipline. The prize was trying to escape. They chased her, their shouts lost in the rain and gunfire. She reached the hatch, wrenched it open, and without a second's hesitation, plunged into the cold, dark water of the river below. The shock of it stole her breath. The current was strong, pulling her under, away from the docks. She heard the confused shouts of Emil's men. Her gambit had worked. She had split their forces. She had created the chaos Conrad needed. She had saved him. Now she just had to save herself. Conrad felt the shift in the battle outside. He heard the shouts, the change in the rhythm of the gunfire. He knew something had happened with Amara, a cold, terrifying rage unlike anything he had ever felt washed over him. It made him brutally efficient. The fight inside the warehouse ended. Emil was cornered, a sneer on his face. "Looking for your little pet?" he taunted. "My men are taking care of her." Conrad didn't waste words. He moved, a blur of violence. The fight was short and merciless. He left his cousin broken and bleeding on the concrete floor for his men to clean up. He was already outside, his eyes wild, searching. Gregor met him, his face grim. "She went into the river. She drew them off. She saved us." Conrad ran to the edge of the pier, his eyes scanning the dark, churning water. There was nothing. Just the rain and the black river. For one terrible, heart-stopping moment, he felt the same helpless agony he'd felt when he'd lost Annalise. The world tilted, the foundation of his empire cracking beneath his feet. "Amara!" he roared, her name torn from his throat, a sound of pure anguish. And then he saw it. A flicker of movement 50 yards downriver. A hand clinging to a rusty buoy. He didn't wait for his men. He dove into the water, the expensive suit jacket pulling at him like a shroud. The cold was a shock, but the fire in his veins burned hotter. He swam, his powerful strokes eating up the distance. He reached her just as her grip was failing. She was exhausted, hypothermic. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Her body was trembling violently. "Conrad," she gasped, her teeth chattering. He held her, keeping their heads above water. "I have you," he said, the words a vow. "I have you." Back in the penthouse, wrapped in thick blankets in front of a roaring fire. The silence was profound. The storm outside and the storm inside had passed, leaving a quiet, altered landscape. Conrad knelt before her, dabbing at a cut on her cheek with an antiseptic wipe. His movements were gentle, almost reverent. The cost had been paid. 2 of his men were dead. His cousin was being dealt with in a way that ensured he would never be a threat again. And Amara, she had thrown away her old life and leaped into his. He finished cleaning the cut, his eyes fixed on her face. The mask was gone. All the walls, all the cold control had been washed away in the river. All that was left was the man. Their mistake, he said, his voice soft, was thinking you were my weakness. He reached up, his thumb gently stroking her cheekbone. They did not understand you are my reason. It was more than a confession. It was an abdication. His empire, his power, his life. It had all been a means to an end. He just hadn't known what the end was until she fell into his world. Amara looked at this man, this German crime boss who commanded a city with a whisper, and she felt no fear. She saw the scar above his eye, the ghost of the woman he had lost, and the fierce, desperate way he was looking at her now. He wasn't offering her a cage of protection anymore. He was offering her the throne beside him. She didn't say yes. She didn't need to. She leaned forward, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. She felt its steady, solid beat beneath her palm. It felt like coming home. The city lights glittered below, a kingdom at their feet. But the only world that mattered was right here, in the warm, quiet space between them. It was a choice made in silence. And it was absolute.